and they commissioned 3 artists to work with the libraries in the area. So it was Burnley Library, Accrington Library and Nelson Library. We worked with youth groups and school children around notions of conscientious objection during the First World War. So it was a really interesting project, given the amount of attention that there's been on the centenary of the war. Lots of the young people that we worked with had no idea of the history in Pennine, Lancashire, of Quakers, pacifism, Independent Labour Party and conscientious objection that happened in this region. Upstairs in Burnley Library at the moment, there's paintings, there's a banner, all produced with the young people. And I think the exhibition lasts until the end of February, and then it moves on to Nelson Library as well. So that's the whole context for what's going on with conscientious objection. And we're very, very lucky tonight to have Cyril come and talk to us. Many of you may be aware of his work and aware of his book, Comrades in Conscience.
Speaking up for his own town as he would like to see it. You've always got to take that business of oral history with a bit of a pinch of salt until you find corroborating evidence. He suggested I go and talk to somebody else. And here's another man from Huddersfield I spoke to at the same time, about 6 months later, a chap called Arthur Gardner. Arthur, also very involved in the labour movement in Huddersfield, trade unionist, member of the Dyers Union. He was a dye house labourer in the wool textile industry. Very militant trade unionist, also a member of the socialist movement, unlike Wilf, who was what you might call an ethical, come-to-Jesus socialist of the ILP variety. Arthur was a straight-down-the-line Marxist, member of the British Socialist Party. And I asked Arthur, what was Huddersfield like in the First World War? He said, well, I was a CO, went to prison, ended up in Wakefield Work Centre. And yes, and by the way, Huddersfield was special. And it was special because a lot of COs, it was special because they were tolerated and so on. So he was telling me, they hadn't colluded, in fact they hadn't met for years. They were telling me almost exactly the same thing. And some years later, I met Florence Shaw. Her brother Willie had been a CO in the First World War. I never met Willie, he died in 1947. We were talking about the First World War. She was a teenager, part of the socialist movement, militant part of the women's movement, even at an early age. And I asked her the question about Huddersfield in the First World War, and she said exactly the same thing. Huddersfield was a bit different. It was a bit special. It was special because numbers and toleration. Okay. So, foolishly, I set that all aside and came back to it 20 years later in the 1980s. And I came back to it with a simple question in mind. And you can tell what the simple question is going to be, because all research starts with a simple question. Was Huddersfield really special? Yeah? CEOs from the ILP.
In the middle row.
Which is your dad, this one?
In the middle row, yeah.
That's Jack Burrows Senior.
Uncle Frank, Uncle Jim, Uncle Euclid.
Euclid Thursby. Yeah, they're all there.
Yeah, that's Euclid.
It's a nostalgia trip. Okay. It's interesting how pictures were taken. I think people took pictures that they invested with far more significance. I mean, we snap happy these days, aren't we? You know, you can snap with your phone, snap with all sorts of things, put them on the net, then remove them and move on to something else. Photographs at that time were a bit more precious. Yeah? And they were regarded, I think, with more seriousness. Here's a very serious record of the testimony of these lads from Nelson ILP and the stance they took against the war. The same is true of those Huddersfield men we saw in Wakefield Work Centre. Lady Ottoline Morell, very interesting character. The whole Garsington phenomenon is very interesting. She was one of Bertrand Russell's lovers, and he seemed to have quite a lot of them. And he was an anti-war advocate as well. She and Philip threw open Garsington Manor as a kind of home for conscience objectors, not on the run, but the home farm at Garsington Manor was used as a centre for conscience objectors to do work of national importance. If you look through the records of the Pelham Committee, which coordinated all of this, you'll find references to Garsington Manor throughout. And there it is, a rather nice 16th century building. At what time did you form the view that war was wrong. Yeah? If they said, well, it was 1915, then they were in trouble. No. They had to demonstrate that they had been war resistors of one kind or another from before the war began. They then had to demonstrate what organisations they were part of that had taken that line, so the Independent Labour Party in many places wouldn't do, but if they were part of a religious community, then that would be better. They had to argue, had to tell them what they'd done to demonstrate this. Could people be called in evidence to support their case, and so on and so forth. So they were rehearsed in all of that. They were told, I suppose, that they've got to tick these boxes if they wanted to get some kind of exemption.